For more than 110 years, the story of Titanic has captivated many of us across the globe. One of the most popular movies was James Cameron's 1999 film entitled Titanic. It was a fictional movie about two gorgeous people who fell in love and have a steamy relationship below decks. The real-life RMS Titanic sunk in the Atlantic Ocean on April 15, 1912, after hitting an iceberg during its maiden voyage to New York City. Over 2,000 passengers were on the ship, and there were several depicted in the movie. The following are real-life characters who appeared in Titanic. Margaret Brown, commonly known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, was played by Kathy Bates. Molly earned her nickname because she urged the crewmen in charge of her lifeboat to go back and rescue more passengers. Accounts vary as to whether or not the lifeboat went back, but Brown's story took on a life of its own with a musical called The Unsinkable Molly Brown, which debuted in 1960. Edward James Smith was the captain of the Titanic when the ship sank. He was survived by his wife and their daughter. Joseph Bruce Ismay, played by Jonathan Hyde, was the chairman and managing director of the White Star Line. He survived the sinking of the Titanic and later testified before the U.S. Senate in an inquiry about the disaster. In the days following the sinking, the press harshly criticized him for saving himself while women and children were still aboard the ship. John Jacob Astor IV, played by Eric Braeden, was the richest passenger on the Titanic and was also one of the richest men in the world. His body was eventually recovered and was identified by the initials sewn into his jacket. Madeline Force was John Jacob Astor IV's second wife, played by Charlotte Chatton. She was pregnant at the time of the Titanic voyage. She and her husband were on their way back to America so the baby could be born there. She survived the sinking and gave birth 4 months later. Cosmo Duff Gordon, played by Martin Jarvis, was an Olympic silver medalist in fencing who survived the sinking. Like Bruce Ismay, he drew criticism for seeming to violate the women and children first rule established by White Star crew. He died in 1931 at age 68. Lady Duff Gordon, played by Rosalind Ayers, was the wife of Cosmo Duff Gordon, and Rose mentions in the Titanic movie she was a fashion designer. She not only designed lingerie, but she also wrote fashion columns for magazines like Harper's Bazaar and Good Housekeeping. Interestingly enough, Rosalind Ayers is the real-life wife of Marvin Jarvis. Michael Ensign played Benjamin Guggenheim, who was a wealthy American businessman who boarded the ship with his mistress, Leontine Aubert. He died during the sinking with his valet, Victor Giglio. His brother, Solomon Guggenheim, is the Guggenheim whose name is on the Guggenheim Museum in New York City. Noelle Leslie, the Countess of Rothes, was barely in the movie, but she is played by Rochelle Rose. She was actually a heroine of the Titanic disaster. She helped steer her lifeboat away from the sinking ship and then to the rescue ship. Thomas Andrews, played by Victor Garber, was the shipbuilder in charge of the building of the Titanic. He handed out life jackets and tried to help as many people as possible get to safety. He died when the ship sank and was survived by his wife and their daughter. William Murdoch served as first officer on the Titanic and was played by Ewan Stewart. The movie shows Murdoch dying by suicide after the ship hits the iceberg, but whether the real Murdoch did so is a matter of debate. After the release of Titanic, Murdoch's family demanded an apology from James Cameron and 20th Century Fox for the portrayal of their relative. Scott Anderson played Frederick Fleet, who was the lookout who spotted the iceberg that Titanic hit. As depicted in the movie, he really did shout, "Iceberg, right ahead," when he saw it. Fleet survived the sinking and served in World War I and World War II. He died by suicide in 1965. Gregory Cook played John Jack Phillips, who was the senior wireless operator on board the Titanic. He sent out the distress call after the ship struck the iceberg. Jack died when the ship sank. Harold Bride, played by Craig Kelly, was the junior wireless operator on board Titanic. He did survive the sinking and testified during the Senate inquiry about it. Charles Lightoller, played by Jonathan Phillips, served as second officer on the Titanic. He survived the sinking and continued to work for White Star Line and later served during World War I. During World War II, he used his private yacht to assist with the evacuation of Dunkirk. Mark Lindsay Chapman played Henry Wilde, who was the first officer on the ship and served on several White Star ships before working his way up to his position on Titanic. He died during the sinking. Isidore Strauss, played by Lou Patter, was the co-owner of Macy's department store. He married his wife Ida, played by Elsa Raven, in 1871. Ida reportedly refused to board a lifeboat upon finding out that her husband could not board one, and they both died in the sinking. Colonel Archibald Gracie IV was played by Bernard Fox. He survived the ship's sinking by climbing on top of an overturned lifeboat. Wallace Henry Hartley, played by Jonathan Evans Jones, led his 8-member band as the Titanic sank, and he tragically died during the process. I hope you enjoyed this little video on some of the real-life characters from the movie Titanic. Thanks for watching.